Well, hello, everybody. What a great engaged group we have here today. So how many of you are wondering, what does the state of the American workforce actually have to do with space travel? Yeah? Well, great question. And I have a little story to tell you. First off, I'm Darleen Lenyo. I'm a vice president and the director of talent development and employee engagement for Crescent Bank, and we're a small bank homed out of New Orleans, Louisiana, and we have about 450 employees nationwide. And it was probably a little over 2 years ago that our chief of staff started talking about employee engagement. Were employees sharing best practices? Were they telling us process improvements, efficiency gains, and were we actually hearing those suggestions? And then were employees loyal and committed to the organization? And quite frankly, were we being the best company that we could possibly be? Fast forward it to about 18 to 20 months later, and it's a Sunday afternoon. And it's the perfect Sunday afternoon. You know, the kind where you're in your pajamas all day, and you only leave the sofa to go to the refrigerator and come back? Yeah. So on this Sunday afternoon, I get a phone call. And during the course of that conversation, I'm asked, Darlene, what has employee engagement been like for you and the organization? And I compared it to putting a man on the moon. Now, in my defense, in my perfect pajama-wearing lazy Sunday, I just got finished watching Armageddon. And Bruce Willis had just died out of the love of his country, right, and for all of mankind. I mean, can we get more engaged than that, right? But the more I started to talk through that statement, the more that I believe that statement to be true. It was in 1961 that JFK stood in front of Congress and declared, we'll put a man on the moon, return him home safely to Earth, before the end of the decade. We will be the best company that we could be. And in 1969, Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin walked on the moon. One small step for man, one giant leap for mankind. And I believe an employee engagement strategy done well for all the right reasons is a bunch of small steps for the employees that are huge leaps for the organization. And I'd like to tell you a little bit more about how we're making that mission possible. So what Gallup tells us in their latest report, the 2017 State of the American Workforce Report, is that only 33% of US employees are engaged. So let's see something for a minute. I'm very visual. So would you guys mind standing up for me? And the second row, and the third row, would you guys mind standing up for me? So there's probably about 30 people or so in the audience here. And if we were our own organization, this would be our engaged group. The rest of us, not so much so. All right? Now, can I get the rest of this side to stand up for me? And I'll get you two to stand up for me up front, too. So 51% of US employees are actively keeping their pulse on the job market, whether they're engaged or disengaged. That's a big number. So it makes absolute sense that Burson and Associates, you guys can have a seat, thank you. That Burson and Associates are predicting that over $1.5 billion a year will be spent by companies on employee engagement initiatives. And it completely makes sense, because over $400 to $600 billion is what Gallup estimates is lost in revenue due to lost productivity. Those are a tremendous amount of numbers. That's a lot of money. So let's talk about what employee engagement is. Somebody want to give me a definition? What's employee engagement to you? Anybody? Help me out. Collaboration, awesome. What? Buy-in, wonderful. Commitment, love it. So what we define employee engagement is those employees who are emotionally committed to the organization and display discretionary effort. Emotionally committed and give when they're not asked to give. So what is the true reason that businesses are spending $1.5 billion, are spending time and resources and all that money on employee engagement? Well, it comes down to what we know is engaged employees have an impact on the economic state of the company as well as the nation. So it's money well spent. So I'm going to bring out my inner nerd here as we started looking at our data and using the information that we've gathered over the last 2 years from TINYpulse and what people were telling us. And we looked at the Gallup survey, and we didn't have $1 million that Brooks talked about earlier this morning. So we pulled in, looked at what Gallup's Q12 was and did some research on our own and wanted to really see those analytics and the number crunch, basically, on how employee engagement, how we could raise that score, get to more productive employees and better business outcomes. So these are the 12 elements that Gallup uses over their 20-year study. And these elements can actually be categorized into 4 categories, with the first starting at the bottom as being basic needs. That second level is our individual needs. Then it goes to teamwork. And then it goes to professional development and growth, actually. And so we wanted to see what did Gallup, using the state of the American workforce, where US employees were, and then look at where we were, with the idea behind it that we could take the information we've gathered from our TINYpulse surveys and say, quite frankly, okay, this is where our opportunities lie, and then this is what we're doing really, really well, and what are we doing to do that really, really well so we could keep doing it, right? So in addition to our studies, we started studying Zinat Tom. Has anybody heard of Zinat Tom? She's, for the last 10 years, has been studying what she calls the good job strategy. So she looks at retail organizations, things like companies like Trader Joe's and Costco. And how are they turning such a profit? What are they doing that's different than other companies are doing? And she identifies basically 4 things that stand out. One is they're operating with less, like they're offering less products, not everything under the sun. Another thing is they're standardizing and empowering their employees. So they're spending the money on talent and development, training, having the conversations with their employees, standardizing processes, and empowering them to do a very good job. Another thing is they're cross-training against different departments. And they're running with open Slack. How many of you have been in Walmart, right? And there's 20 registers, but there's only 2 or 3 cashiers, and the line has gone of customers or into women's clothing, right? Okay, and you're like frustrated. You're like, 20 registers, how come there aren't more people manning the registers? Well, what good jobs are doing, according to Zinat Tom, those Trader Joe's and those Costco's, is they're actually staffing according to any, hey, we had a ton of people come in, so they're being able to manage the customers, deliver that great customer service. And they're training them and giving them stretch assignments to do other jobs for when the customers aren't in the store. So it keeps things moving, but it gives the employees an opportunity to develop and grow along the way. Well, what she's identified is that there's 4 basic needs and then 5 higher needs that have a huge impact on employee engagement. Those basic needs being pay and benefits, schedules, career path, and then safety and security. So your higher needs are meaningfulness, growth, achievement, belonging, and then that recognition and reward. Here's the thing. People expect to be paid well. They expect good schedules. They expect a career path, and they expect safety and security. And not just the physical safety of doing a complicated job, but the physiological safety that we've heard other speakers talk about in order to take and make a mistake and not have repercussions for it, right? Here's the thing about these. They expect it. It doesn't add to your employee engagement. What it does, though, is subtract from it if it's not there. And it's not until we can make sure that those foundational pieces are there that we can actually move up into those higher needs and offer that meaningfulness, growth, belonging, achievement, and then those rewards and recognition. What we learned at Crescent Bank, though, is what does an organization consist of? People and teams and departments. And not everybody is on the same page at the same time, okay? So we're at different levels, and then it's important to recognize that in your employee engagement strategies and not treat everything as a one-size-fits-all. So let's talk about a couple of those elements that I showed you earlier from Gallup's State of the American Workforce. So the very first element is I know what is expected of me at work. 6 in 10 U.S. employees strongly agree with this statement. Here's the thing what Gallup does tell us as well. If we can raise that number to 8 and 10, we can increase things like productivity, and we can reduce turnover and safety, all having a nice impact to our bottom line as an organization. So what are some of the things that those best companies are actually doing? Well, they're defining and discussing expectations. They're going over implicit expectations with their employees to make sure that everybody's clear. They're also painting the picture of what does outstanding performance look like, instead of just leaving it to the employee to guess, okay? They're actually painting that picture. And they're aligning the individuals up with the departments, the teams, and the organization's goals. So break it down. I get where my job has an impact and helps the organization achieve its goals. Tying me in more to the organization, giving me that buy-in that I'm looking for, and helping to contribute to creating that loyalty and that commitment that we wanted. They're also partnering with the employee to make sure that they're having those expectations discussions, but giving the employee the opportunity to contribute to the conversation, which helps to the buy-in. It puts us both in that picture. And then, of course, that informal and that formal feedback, and it's ongoing. It's not that once a year performance eval that we all tend to hate, right? It's the ongoing, both informal and formal feedback. Let's also take a look at question number 9. So this falls into the teamwork category. And it's my associates or fellow employees are committed to doing quality work. Now, sadly, according to Gallup, only 3 in 10 employees strongly agree with this statement. And if we go back to those previous slides and look at what Zena Tom's data gave us, we know that that fits into more of a higher need category. This has a huge impact. By doubling these numbers significantly, I mean, a 29% reduction in turnover and absenteeism, it's absolutely huge. An 11% increase in profit, Those are some significant numbers to really tie into those business improvements that we're striving for. So what are those best companies doing in order to really get there? Well, they're establishing those performance and accountability standards. And it's really kind of cool because they're using those teams in order to create what the quality standard is. I mean, it's important to note, like, hey, you know what? The person on the team who's not producing ends up setting that standard for the team. And what's really interesting, too, on a 6-to-1 margin, the team members, it's pretty incredible, actually. If you have an employee who's trying but struggling versus an employee where the other team members feel are capable but is not pulling their weight, it has a major reduction in employee engagement for them individually because of the impact of the team, which is very, very significant. So they have to have conversations within those teams and those departments that say, hey, we're going to recognize each other, we're going to do peer-to-peer accountability, and we're going to foster an environment by creating the standards, talking about it, writing it down for those tasks and functions so that we can take and deliver as a team, as a department, and overall as an organization where we really, really want to go with it. So let's get to the Crescent Bank side. There's a little bit of data for you based off of some studies that have gone on. So about 2 years ago, we said, hey, we're going to do TINYpulse. We started talking about employee engagement. Okay? And in the spirit of transparency, we had no idea. We just jumped in. We had some great guidance from David and his team at TINYpulse, which was wonderful, but we just absolutely jumped in, started asking questions, and started listening to what those statements were. And I think it's fantastic. I read something the other day that said, you're probably screwing it up anyway, so just go jump in and do it, because you really can't hurt it anyway, right? And that's kind of where we were. We were like, we're just going to jump in. But it's important when you do jump in that you take the information and the data that you're receiving and act quickly with it. So one of the things that we noticed immediately within a few months of rolling TINYpulse is that they told us we didn't communicate. They didn't say you didn't communicate well. They said you just didn't communicate, like we weren't doing it. And so we were like, okay, well, we think we can fix this relatively easily. Let's communicate. And so one of the things that we started doing was actually sharing the financial statements on a monthly basis with the entire company. So our chief financial officer takes the financial statements, he puts it in a very easy to read format, he sends it out, he lets everybody know what the goal is, what we're striving to achieve. He reminds us all that we play a part in achieving that goal, and then he takes in, which is most important, it's the CFO. If you have any questions, if you want to ask a question, pick up the phone or send me the email. I'll be happy to spend some time with you. And what we wanted the whole company to know is this is where we are financially, and this is what we're striving to achieve, and that we all have a play a part into it. But it's not only not a secret, if you don't understand it, reach out to us and ask some questions that we will spend the time in order to do that. And then we started using the tools at our fingertips in order to communicate. So we use email a lot. Anybody else have a company that you guys pretty much just communicate by email? Yeah, so we were like, people are busy, they're doing their jobs, they get 100 emails a day. It's kind of hard sometimes to figure out like what's important to them and then what's not. So they're trying to filter out what they should look at immediately, what they should save to later, and then ultimately what they never end up looking at, right? So I think it was Bob earlier today who said you need to repeat something 7 times before people get it. We have a hypothesis in our team that says we think we need to communicate at Crescent Bank 13 times before we can make sure that everybody gets it. And then we identified different ways to do that communication. So one of the ways here is you've got a little snagget of what our InfoWeb or our SharePoint looks like. That was one way. We have email, of course, right? We have a magazine that we push out monthly, so that was another way to reiterate information. We have TVs in some locations, that's another way to reiterate information. We have a wall of wins, that was another way to reiterate some information. And then how can we take the message, stay true to what the content is and what the message is, but change it up just enough slightly so that we can call out to the masses and hopefully get more and more people to know that communication, which has been working very well for us, but we're still learning because no matter how much we give them, they still want more and more. And we think that is leading to the fact that they want more say-so into the decisions on where we're leaving. It was what they really mean at communication. But we're still working through to make sure that we've got that kind of pegged out right. So communicate. So this is kind of what our magazine looks like. And when it comes specifically to TINYpulse, it's using our magazine to tell them what TINYpulse is, what employee engagement is, and why it's important for them. Sharing some suggestions, always sharing and communicating several times over our wins, and then making sure that the cheers are noticed and that there's just another way for them to know it's not falling on deaf ears. So we respond to every comment that is made, but we also want to put it out to the masses because the masses obviously don't have access to all of the suggestions that are coming in the door. So as of July of 2016, we actually had implemented 53 wins over that 2-year time period, which we're very, very proud of. And some of it's easy, and some of it was, pretty minor as far as bring back the fun committee, right? Which takes work and is a requirement. And some of it was big, like incentive plans changed or titles changed to accurately reflect what they were doing. But it's our job and our department to make sure that we're reminding people that not only are suggestions being turned to wins, but that we're listening and educating them on how it's really important and how much has been converted to a win. So like in our July magazine, we let everybody know again, 53 suggestions that we feel a good portion of those suggestions, if they wouldn't have come through, if it wasn't for TINYpulse, we would have never gotten them and made those changes. So this is just a look of how we take and push back that feedback and how employee engagement. So my supervisor or someone at work seems to care about me as a person. And 92% of our respondents said that was true, which stood out a lot for us as far as the type of company we are and what our culture actually looks like. And then celebrating those cheers for peers. So anybody who was in the session beforehand, you heard them say, even though your staff, your employee, the organization says, we want to give you suggestions, you kind of have to encourage them constantly to do so. The same thing goes for those cheers for peers as well. And then making sure you're posting those wins anywhere that you can that makes sense. The magazine, our InfoWeb, email, the TVs, the wall of wins. There's lots of work that goes into it, but it has such a positive impact into the overall engagement. So,
hi, I'm Brian Lenyo, Chief Risk Officer of Crescent Bank and Trust. I joined the company about 7 months ago, and many of you asked, who is Risk and what do you actually do? So next week, we set up an information session to answer those questions. And I have a little teaser for you ahead of that session. What's riskier, a gun or a swimming pool? See you next week.
So what we did with this is we knew that professional development was important, and some of the things that were coming through TINYpulse was they wanted to learn our organization and we looked very silo. So how do we bust those silos, right? And part of the way to do that was we figured we asked our chief officers to do Q&A sessions. So we run a Q&A session about every other month where they basically bring one slide. And everything is driven by the employees, whether it's through webinar or whether it's in a classroom setting. They're asking the questions that are important to them, that they want to know, and then we're responding to it, which was another great TINYpulse suggestion. But it didn't look exactly like that. Sometimes with your suggestions, you have to see what they're telling you and then figure out exactly what they're searching for from that suggestion. Sometimes it's just not as black and white as they think or as clear as they think that they're being. Another thing was with that communication transparency is they wanted to hear more from our CEO. So let's see if we can get this to go. Can you press play for me? Nope. Nope? Okay. Well, what we did was we asked the staff what kind of questions that they had for our CEO. We took those questions, and then our trainer, Tina, we filmed it. And we filmed it in such a way where she introduces herself. She says, come on in. It's very much so who we are. We meet Gary into the lobby. They're chatting. They're walking as they're talking. They're smiling. They're having fun. And because it's just, again, who we are. We're not the suit and tie bank that you so often associate with bankers, but instead we're more casual, we're very chatty, and everybody is very, very approachable. So we wanted to make sure that the message and the way that we were conveying that information was true to who we are. Let's see. Oh, nope, we don't need to see Brian again. Okay, so only have a few minutes left, but when it comes down to it, how we started with as we started moving through TINYpulse, getting those suggestions, we started acting quickly. Once we got more and more data, we were able to take those numbers and start looking at it in such a way where we can start spotting our opportunities and then, again, recognizing those areas where we were very, very strong. So we paired it up with our data from Gallup using those Q12 questions and categorized every question that we had asked over the last 2 years based off of element as well as based off of the category. And then we gave an appropriate weight to it based off of responses. And so from a category perspective, this is like our weighted average over the last couple of years of where we stand in those 5 categories, including our happiness category. Now, what I don't have here is a slide of the trend, but the trend's really, really powerful of tying it to there because then you can tie it to whatever's gone on in the organization. So have a layoff, right? Happiness scores tend to drop. You'll see it in other components as well. So if we took Crescent Bank, and this is us looking at it from an element perspective, our weighted average. So again, you can see, yeah, it showed up great. Somebody cares for me at work, we're doing really, really well. And when we developed out that strategy, we wanted to take and compare it to what's our industry standard, what does the state of the American workforce say, what's a goal that we should strive for so that we could start pinpointing, again, those areas that needed improvement and then those areas we were excelling at and then why were we excelling in those areas so we could keep those behaviors up. And then earlier this year, I introduced to my team Google's concept. It's not actually Google's, but I think they made it very popular, is OKRs, objectives and key results. Anybody using objectives and key results in your organization? Yeah, so what we wanted to do was look at overall, what's the organization's goal, right? Take the organization's goal, pull it down, and then come up with a strategy that makes sense. Where this was possible, really powerful for the talent development team, we call ourselves TEDdy because of the TDEE, is as we're brainstorming, we come up with all these phenomenal ideas, no matter what project we're working on, right? From everything from getting benchmark data to we need a marching band, okay? But some things don't drive key results in order to help you obtain your objective. So it gives us the ability to do all that fantastic brainstorming that we do, but then pull that information and say, when we look at this as a task, does it have an impact on a key result? And so it makes it very easy at that particular point to say, not this, definitely this, and then work our strategy accordingly. So as I end my time, tying it back to putting a man on the moon, just like the space program, I think it's a commitment. Okay, when you go ahead and do your employee engagement strategy, it's a very worthwhile commitment. And planning definitely leads to better results. Spending some time looking at the information, digesting the data, talking to people, talking to each other, and doing something about it is very, very impactful for the results that you're looking for. With all that being said, though, if you haven't started an engagement strategy, just jump in. As you're starting to get that data, you can start to plan better for it once you start to learn more and more. And it can't be spearheaded by one person. JFK stood in front of Congress, got Congress to back him. Then it took engineers, mechanics, astronauts, all kinds of people in order to make the space program work before we were able to actually put a man on the moon. I believe that when it comes to your organization, it doesn't just take your C-suite, just zoning in on the C-suite, who are important, by the way. You need their buy-in, you absolutely need their support. But for us, what we've determined is it's really the managers who have a huge, those front-level managers, them having a say-so, them being very committed and bought into the process is a big, big impact and positive direction for us. And you don't want to forget your employees. As an employee, I have a say-so as to whether I want to be engaged or not. So they need to be included in that process as well. And that's my presentation for you guys today.
Darlene, thank you so much.